You
That's
did.
what I want to hear. 'Cause I'm gonna
42
tell you
points.
I'm going
Do I need to say anything else?
What happened in this game? I don't think Draymond should have been suspended at all.
Are you
I don't
out
think-
of your
I don't
damn
think-
mind?
I don't.
You
I
are
don't-
out of your damn mind.
Hey, Josh, can you smell?
Really?
Cooking. Let's go back to SmackDown.
And completely stolen Cody Rhodes' WrestleMania moment. This is total. No, you don't get to talk right now.
Oh, really?
No.
You don't get
No. No.
I am projecting. That's what I do with the media. You guys are afraid to put your freaking takes out there. Yes, that's what I'm doing.
You, again,
You
just
don't
like.
know how sports media works. This is my job. Josh, this may be the most loaded championship rings of all time. Brandon Lewis and Brandon World, Josh Ungar, the host of the Sports Room Talk Show. Ungar, I don't know if we've had a show this loaded.
There were some fantastic football games over the weekend, and the center of the college football universe was Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and oh boy, did this game deliver. I mean, first of all, you had Alabama start out the game by going up 28-0, I believe it was, and you're like, okay, this game is over. And Georgia says, no, excuse me, we're a top 4 team here. So they come roaring back, actually take the lead for like 13 seconds, and then Jalen Milroe says, nah, I'm going to throw the game-winning touchdown pass. What a freaking game.
And back and forth, and yes, to elaborate on your point, I did think the game was over. At halftime, I went and took a little break and watched part 2 of a certain documentary on Netflix about a certain professional wrestling figure. And then I went back and I looked at the score, and it was 28-15 Alabama. Georgia was driving, so I said, no, better strap in here. I think Georgia's going to make this a game. Long and behold, they did. I got to say, I thought Alabama, we talked about this last week. You had said you thought it was going to be more of a high-scoring game than I did. I kind of thought both teams would start out the way Georgia started out, which was a little nervous, not right. Alabama just blitzed them to start the game. 2 turnovers. Jalen Milroe was essentially perfect in the first half, ran for over 100 rushing yards. I thought that was the best game he has ever played. Under the circumstances, in the whites, he showed something last year in the SEC championship game late in the game, but he still wasn't as good of a passer as what he was on Saturday night. And I think Alabama, part of it is, I think they somewhat thought they were dominating Georgia so badly. They sort of let their foot off the gas offensively when Georgia really wasn't dead yet. They were not in attack mode. You saw Jalen Milroe not running around as much. You saw Georgia really starting to contain the edge defensively. And then Carson Beck with just a few amazing deep balls down the sideline to get Georgia back in that game. Georgia also started using the running game in the second half. And then obviously, like you said, the last few plays of the game, back and forth, 1-play touchdowns on both sides. A game that looked like Alabama was going to come in and stomp Georgia at halftime, turned into what we all thought it was going to be, which is probably the game of the season.
I would not be surprised if we see these 2 teams play each other again at least 2 more times.
So that's interesting because, to me, in order for that to happen, Georgia probably has to beat Texas. And I don't know if they can.
And they probably have to beat Tennessee, which Alabama has to play Tennessee on the 19th, and which is the same day Georgia has to play Texas. And you and I were just talking about this. We were trying to figure out, would College Game Day be in Knoxville, Tennessee, or would they be in Austin, Texas? Because those are both huge games. But we got a couple weeks before that. But let me ask you this. Did Jalen Milroe jump to the front of the pack for the Heisman Trophy after that performance?
Um, I think it's debatable. I think what Travis Hunter has done at Colorado, even though they are such a mess in my opinion, I know they're winning games. I get it, but to me, they're mostly a two-player show in Sador and Travis Hunter. I think when you have a two-way player like that who was playing both corner and receiver exceptionally well, unless Travis Hunter gets injured here, I really think it's his Heisman Trophy to lose. I think Jalen Milroe is certainly a candidate. And again, the way he played Saturday night, that was the best game he ever played. To me, he's got a little Lamar Jackson in him. He's got a little Jalen Hurts in him. Just seeing him in that Alabama jersey looks a little bit like Hurts when he was there, in my opinion. So I think Alabama offense, I think Jalen's going to be great. I think he's going to continue to be great. Certainly a Heisman Trophy candidate, but I don't know. Both those two guys in Colorado right now are going to be hard to top.
So Jalen Milroe on Saturday was 27 of 33 for 374 yards, 2 touchdowns. That was his passing game. He had 16 carries for 117 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a long of 36 yards. I think that was his 36-yard touchdown run.
Yeah, but most of that came in the first half. Like I said, he had over 100 yards in the first half. So, for whatever reason, Alabama, and again, this is a learning experience for Kalen DeVore, who I was very impressed with. His first time being in that SEC and that environment against that team who's well coached by Kirby Smart, to come out with Nick Saban there, who we both alluded to could give Alabama potential motivation. To come out and play like that in the first half. Again, I thought Alabama just thought they were dominating Georgia so badly they didn't need to give it their best shot in the second half, and that's when comebacks happen. So I actually think the way that game went down is the best case scenario for both teams. Georgia can now say, hey, we face deficits. We can come back from this. And Alabama can say, hey, we learned our lesson. We need to keep our foot on the gas pedal.
The way Alabama played reminded me a lot of the way Kalen DeBoer constructed his offense last year with Michael Penix at Washington. Like Ryan Williams, the 17-year-old who is...
I was blanking on his name. I wanted to bring him up. Thank you for saying it. That kid, I am going to say it right now. I don't care what his age is. He could be a legit NFL wide receiver right now.
Oh, yeah. 17 years old, and he's doing that. He had 6 receptions for 177 yards, 1 touchdown, and a long of 75 yards. But, again, Jalen Milroe, it reminds me, yes, I see your comparisons to Jalen Hurts, like you mentioned earlier, but I see Michael Penix, the way the Alabama offense is running.
Well, Penix didn't move as much as Milroe.
Sure, that's a fair argument, but I do see a comparison between not necessarily in the way they play, but the way the offense is flowing, like what you saw at Washington last year and what you're seeing at Alabama this year.
Basically, I think Alabama is pretty much flipped the script. They've gone from one of the best defensive teams in the country, and they're still very good defensively. They still have a lot of the Nick Saban recruits, though obviously not as much. Some of them went to the transfer portal. But I heard somebody say this week that basically Kalen DeVore is the offensive version of Nick Saban. And, they could be right on that. From what I've seen so far, and I told you this last week, I thought Alabama was going to win the game. I thought Alabama was better than Georgia this year. I like Georgia. I still think they're going to be in the CFP, even if they lose to Texas, which is, again, our conversation going back to how valuable is the regular season now with the expanded CFP playoff. But Georgia showed some signs offensively, but again, a lot of their signs in every big game they play, they're coming in the second half. maybe the Kentucky game. Now Kentucky beat Ole Miss. So is that a credible more win for Georgia that they were able to survive against Kentucky? I don't know. I don't get a good read off Georgia right now like I do off Alabama.
Right. Like Alabama goes on the road and plays Vanderbilt this week. And then they host South Carolina. So I don't think you're going to learn a lot more about Alabama until that October 19th game in Knoxville against Tennessee. As of right now, Alabama's favored by 23 against Vanderbilt. Meanwhile, Georgia, they're going to be angry coming home to face Auburn after the way that game in Tuscaloosa went down. So Auburn is about to feel.
And Auburn's not as great of a team this year. I would say this, like me and you talked about, I don't think these two teams are going to meet in the SEC championship game this year unless Tennessee and Texas were to somehow lose in another game. I do think, however, it's plausible, depending on seeding, these two teams could meet again in the college football playoff. And
if we were to get these two in the national championship, I would be perfectly all right with that because the last two national championships they've played against each other have been fantastic football games.
I'll add one more element to it. I know a lot of people want to still say that LSU is Alabama's, number one main rival. I don't think that anymore. I actually think Georgia is Alabama's main rival.
It's Georgia. Given how frequently they've met in the SEC championship, given that they've played twice in the national championship, it's Georgia. And to go back to your earlier point, Carson Beck had a fantastic game against.
Well, he had a good game in the second half. He was a disaster in the first half.
Oh, that I agree with. So let me ask you this: we know that Jalen Milroe is most likely going to the NFL draft after this season. If I had to guess, do you think that depending on whoever has the number one pick, that he could be the number one? He could go number one.
I don't. I alluded to it a little earlier. I personally think Travis Hunter should go number one. Depending on who, again, if it's a quarterback needy team, maybe you go Shedeur Sanders, who, I don't know. I don't think these guys are generational prospects like the quarterbacks we had in this past year's draft. But I think it would take even more of sensational play by Milroe to get that number one pick. Because I think the way all the scouts are thinking right now is Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders are going 1 and 2.
I don't know about Shedeur Sanders. It depends a lot on what Dion does. If he stays at Colorado, does Shedeur go to the NFL or does he continue to stay at UC with his father?
Yeah, that's a good point. I really think it obviously depends on who's going to get that number one pick later in the year.
Yeah, which it looks like Jacksonville is, but
well,
I mean, go ahead.
Let's talk football. Let's talk about the game that happened last night. The game that we both said was a huge game going into it for both sides. Jared Goff. My bad. This is one of the first real arguments that me and you, Josh, had on our first ever couple shows at Championship Rings. Would you take Geno Smith or would you take Jared Goff? And I defended Jared Goff, and I'm still going to defend Jared Goff because as I sit here today, you can make an argument that right there with Sam Darnold, somehow, right now, Jared Goff is the best quarterback in the NFC conference. He went 18 of 18 last night, nearly 300 yards. Even his coach didn't even know he was perfect. He said, I gave the game ball to somebody else, so I would have known that. I would have given it right to Jared Goff.
Yeah.
So, but I do think my biggest takeaway from this game is both things came true that I thought were going to come true. Number one, again, I said it before the year, I like Seattle. I thought their 3-0 was a little bit smoke screenish. They haven't really played anybody. I'm very concerned about the back end of that defense. And number two, on the Lions side, offensively, when they can run the football like that with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, and they remember that they have a powerful, ferocious offensive line with that great run game, they are very hard to beat.
If they get that number one seed, look out. Um, I can't.
Right now, they're still a game behind Minnesota, and they got a lot tougher schedule than Minnesota. I'll just throw
Yeah,
that out there.
yeah. Detroit's next game is at Dallas, and then they're at Minnesota. So that's a tough. That's a brutal stretch right there. Um, but Jared Goff was the better quarterback, no doubt about it. But you can't say Geno Smith had a bad game.
No, he didn't. But Geno's not going to win a game if you're throwing it 55 times. What is Seattle doing offensively? Kenneth Walker had 3 touchdowns, but they didn't even try to get him the ball in the first half.
Yeah, I'll give you that. But Geno had almost 400 yards passing. So that's not bad right there.
Yeah, but a lot of it was late in the game when you're trailing, you're down 2 possessions, and I call those empty calorie stat padding yards.
You can, but Seattle, they were trying to make a push late in that game.
Detroit stupidly decided to throw the ball from their own goal line, and basically Jared Goff nearly tried to avoid a safety. Turns out his knee was down. I don't know what the hell they were thinking there.
I think that was another Dan Campbell bump to my head moment.
No, I think that was Ben Johnson being too aggressive, because Ben Johnson has the ultimate say in play calling, and they did have Tim Patrick, who I never understood why Denver cut him. I always liked him as a receiver. He was open on the deep post if their offensive line couldn't protect down on the goal line, which would have essentially ended the game. But in that situation, Seattle only has 1 timeout. Probably best to run the football. Again, we know these 2 teams. We know how well they played. We talked about it a couple weeks ago, and Dan Campbell said it, in an interview, or maybe it wasn't an interview. I think Joe Buck just said it when they were talking to Dan in their production meeting, that, he knows the last couple of times they played Seattle what the result was. And, the Lions had quote unquote revenge on their mind, even though they don't play each other. It's division rivalries.
Yeah, I do. That's part of the reason why I do think there's a bit of a rivalry here between the Seahawks and the Lions. Maybe I'm in the minority on that one, but given how frequently they've played each other recently, and given how high scoring these games have been, and generally, I know last night didn't, but the last couple times, the game came right down to the final seconds. It
was really the same game they played the last 2 times. The difference was Tyler Lockett's fumble early in the first quarter put Detroit up 2 possessions.
Yeah. By the way, I loved those black jerseys from Detroit.
They did look sick. And by the way, I would love to see these 2 teams eventually play a game in Seattle, because I think that'd be a way different story.
Oh, yeah.
If it was in November. We know how Jared Goff struggles outdoors and struggles in the cold, but indoors on a Monday night in September, he can let it rip, and he can be one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League.
I'll tell you, you can say Jared Goff was the MVP of that game. I'm not going to argue with you on that one. But Amon-Ra St. Brown was just a monster in that game.
How about that play that I'm calling the Motor City Special?
That was awesome. Even though I was rooting for Seattle in that game, because they are my favorite team in the NFC. They always have been. But it's Browns above anybody else. But still, that play was just awesome. I loved it. I feel like the Philly special, or whatever we're calling it, it's almost becoming somewhat of a regular thing in the NFL. We've seen teams pull it off on prime time. The Browns did it on Thursday night a few years ago against the Jets.
And if you remember, they did a similar play in 2020 against Dallas, where Odell Beckham basically ran around. I think it ended up being a run, but he tried to throw it, and there was just open room.
Yeah, and then I think he ended up scoring a touchdown on that play.
Yes.
But so I shouldn't say it's becoming a more regular play, but I feel like we're seeing that type of play a bit more in the NFL.
So let me have this for both teams. Me and you talked about it. I picked Minnesota to go in Green Bay and knock off the Packers. I was right on that. I said going into this game meant more to Detroit than it did for Seattle because if the Lions fell to 2-2 and Minnesota's 4-0, Detroit's in trouble. Where the NFC West, the Rams, I like them, but it's just not their year. They're injury riddled. They got guys banged up all over the place. Maybe they get their guys back. They can make a late playoff run. Probably going to be hard to win the division. San Francisco looks like they're getting healthy again, minus McCaffrey, which Mason's done a good job filling in for him. And then you got Arizona, who we're about to talk about this guy here in a minute, but that was the most surprising outcome of the weekend for me. And not that Washington won, but how lopsided that game was.
Yeah.
So now Seattle, they got the Giants at home, which I'm sorry, that should be a win for Seattle. But then they host San Francisco
on Thursday Night Football.
To me, Seattle, you got to win one of these big games. You can't just beat up on the Giants, a Tua-less Dolphins team, New England, and Bo Nix to start his career and tell me that you're a good football team.
Yeah. So when I look at Seattle's upcoming schedule, they've got the Giants, then they've got the 49ers on Thursday Night Football at Atlanta, host Buffalo, and host the Rams, and then at San Francisco.
So after the Giants game, I mean, I don't want to sound harsh here, but there's a reality, depending on how many guys the Rams get back, and McVay typically owns Seattle, no matter who their coach is then. I think could Seattle go 1-4, 0-5 in that stretch post Giants?
Maybe. So Detroit, meanwhile, has at Dallas, at Minnesota, host Tennessee, at Green Bay, at Houston on Sunday Night Football, hosting Jacksonville, at Indianapolis, and then hosting Chicago on Thanksgiving.
So I think they could go 4-4, 5-3 in that stretch, and we'll see how Minnesota does, obviously.
Yes, and then following Thanksgiving, they host Green Bay, and then they host Buffalo.
So, okay, let's go to this question because Jayden Daniels has lit up the NFL world for 4 weeks. He is the best of all time, actually, for 4 weeks in terms of completion percentage, not just for a rookie. That's any quarterback in the history of the league. So the question on screen here, obviously, is would you rather have the rookie Jayden Daniels or combine Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, and the other two quarterbacks in the NFC East for the rest of the season? Now, this question is an interesting one because I don't even know what the hell I watched on Sunday other than my team and the Browns not knowing how to tackle. That was the worst Sunday of football watching I've ever had in my life. With that being said, I want to believe that this turnover issue for Jalen Hurts is going to stop because right now it's just a fumble issue. It's not even an interception issue. He hasn't thrown a pick this past game against Tampa. It was the bad fumble. When Philadelphia was trying to get back in that game, they had a chance to make it a one possession game. Dak is very good. He's always going to get you your empty calorie yards. He's going to beat up on bad teams. Jayden Daniels is wowing the world. Now, I don't think, like some people do, that this is an RG3 situation and he's going to flame out. I don't believe that at all. If you recall, and I keep telling you this, there's a reason why I picked the Commanders to be in second place and make a wild card. And now, to be honest with you, the Commanders may end up winning this division if Philadelphia continues to collapse.
I think, let me just stop you right there for just a second. I think the reason Jayden Daniels is drawing the RG3 comparison is not so much because he'll flame out. It's because of the big hits he's taken in college. And, like, if you remember, RG3 kept sustaining a bunch of injuries throughout his career with Washington when they went under a different name that I'm personally not going to say because I just don't like saying that name. But nonetheless, I think that's the reason he's drawing the RG3 comparison. Not so much because of the flame out,
Well,
aspect.
and I think people are forgetting. I don't know if you remember this, Josh. They started 3-6 that year, then they rattled off 7 wins in a row to win the division. So, you
Yeah,
know,
but RG3 sustained multiple injuries with while he's with Washington over multiple seasons.
he
It,
did, and listen, they have played pretty bad defenses, right? The Giants, Arizona's defense, we think is okay. It's not great. And then who who am I? Oh, Cincinnati's defense, who we know is not very good. So, and then you have Tampa's defense, who Todd Bowles rattled him in his first game as a starter. I'm interested to see how he plays this week against the Jim Schwartz Browns defense that has not been as good as advertised, but Schwartz is a very good defensive coordinator. To answer the question on screen, I think Jane Daniels is going to have a very good year. I think there's going to be some regression at some point. I think Jalen Hurts and this Eagles offense is going to take off at some point. I think there's a great opportunity coming out of the bye to essentially save the season when you take on the Browns in week 6, which I will be on the Sports Room Talk Show with this man, Josh Ungar, to preview that game on the Unger to the Next YouTube channel. I get Dak, who is always going to have top 5 numbers. I get Jalen Hurts, so I think by the end of the year we'll have a very good season. I think I'd rather have both those guys right now by a very slight margin over Jaden Daniels for the rest of the way. For the first 4 weeks, I give it up to Jaden Daniels. Let's see if he can sustain it for 13 more.
you like that we're not even including Daniel Jones in this discussion?
Hey, I got to be honest with you, man. Brian Dable, what the hell are you doing kicking 5 field goals? I mean, come on. Oh, you know what? If the Giants were more aggressive in that game Thursday night, I know I'm pulling a Josh Unger, ladies and gentlemen, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but if the Giants were more aggressive and they just got one touchdown in that game, the Cowboys are 1-3, and I'm probably taking Jane Daniels to answer this question.
Yeah. I think I am going to take Jaden Daniels in this for this question because based on what I'm seeing right now, it does seem like there's a bit of a disconnect between Sirianni and Jalen Hurts. And as of right now, I'm not sure how they're going to iron out those issues, even though they're on the bye week this week. That still scares me. And like you said, a lot of Dak's stats are in garbage time, whether it's because the Cowboys are blowing out their opponent or they're getting blown out themselves. So it's like what we're seeing from Jaden Daniels is he's sustaining this throughout the whole game. So
Well, a lot of this is because they're up so much because they get up early and they're forcing the opposing teams to throw, not run as much. They're staying on schedule. I still need to see Jane Daniels in a game where he's behind and he comes back and wins the game because he wasn't even that great against the Giants. Completion percentage wise, he was, but they did not get in the end zone. So
now that part I agree with you. But let me ask you this, because I'm hearing these comparisons. You look at what C.J. Stroud did last year with the Houston Texans. And
I think this is so unfair. If this is the direction you're going, I'm not singling out you. I'm singling out the media for starting this bullcrap.
I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with the comparison. I'm just bringing it into the discussion since we're talking about Jaden Daniels. We saw what C.J. Stroud did last year, brought a dysfunctional team in the Houston Texans all the way to a division title and a playoff win. And we're seeing kind of the same thing with Jaden Daniels. So based on what you just said, you don't think those comparisons are fair?
No, I don't.
Why?
Because I think they're two completely different players. I think that was 10 years ago. And I think that the NFL has changed very much so. And I think RG3 had a great week 1 against New Orleans.
No, I'm not talking about RG3. I said CJ Stroud.
Yeah. No, I got you. I thought you were talking about the comparisons that some people are making that Jaden Daniels is CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams is Bryce Young, which I think
No,
is absolute bullshit.
no, I'm not. I haven't even heard that comparison.
Because I've heard that talk all this week, and I think the media is freaking stupid trying to figure out questions.
No, I
Um,
haven't heard that. I'm just talking. I've heard about the comparison between what C.J. Stroud did last year with Houston and what Jaden Daniels is doing with Washington this
Listen,
year.
did I not say before the year Washington has Houston elements to it? I remember specifically telling you that.
I believe you did. Yes.
I said they got a young defensive head coach with a brilliant offensive coordinator, young quarterback, and good weapons who outside of McLaurin we didn't know much about. Same thing with Houston's weapons a year ago. Zach Ertz has had a career resurgence at tight end. Though again, I don't know how long that's going to last. I need to see more out of Washington. Like again, Stroud was good last year, but and we like the Texans, but and you were on them in the division more than I was. But we also have to admit it did take a Jacksonville collapse for Houston to win the division. This is an easier division, and I think, like I said, Washington right now is in the driver's seat unless Philadelphia comes out of the bye the way I think they can and absolutely get on a roll here with the couple games that they have. Cleveland, Giants, Cincinnati will be tough in Cincinnati, but then you got Jacksonville after that. So
Okay, you brought up Cincinnati and the Giants, so I gotta go off on a little bit of a tangent on this. The NFL had an opportunity to flex Bengals Giants out of Sunday Night Football and put Commanders Ravens into Sunday Night Football. And they decided, nah, we don't want Jaden Daniels versus Lamar Jackson in prime time. We want Joe Burrow versus Daniel Jones. Huh? What if why would you not flex that game between the Commanders and the Ravens into Sunday Night Football? I know it's only week 6, but you have the capability of flexing, and people want to see that matchup. I don't know anybody that wants to see Joe Burrow against Danny Derps. No, thank you.
no, I agree with you, but I also think if you notice, the NFL is very conservative when it comes to flexing games. And part of the reason is because they can only do, I believe it's two, up until like week 13 or week 14, something like that. And then they get unlimited for the end of the year. Like Jacksonville at Philly right now, I think is one they're probably going to flex out in week 9. I haven't taken a look at the other games, but that's a candidate right now to be flexed out, especially if Philadelphia loses another game. Jacksonville, fires Doug Peterson because that's the whole angle on that game is Doug Peterson coming back to Philadelphia. So that's a candidate, and that might be one of the reasons why they didn't flex Bengals Giants because they're probably going to flex out Jacksonville Philly.
I also think in week 17 they'll flex out Dolphins Browns in favor of Packers Vikings.
That's the way it's looking right now. I got to tell you, I know this isn't on our rundown today, but Miami's a mess.
Okay, let's just talk about it. We don't even like Miami is a total mess. The Browns are a total mess. I don't get it.
Any shot Miami calls Cleveland about Winston, I was even thinking Philly about Kenny Pickett. They have to do something. They don't have a quarterback.
No. Um I wish the Dolphins would call about number 4, but obviously
there's a joke out there, and he's denied it. But do you think Miami would try to give that guy that was calling the Bucks Eagles game on Sunday a call, see if he'd come down?
no. By the way, did you hear about that little exchange between Baker and Tom Brady?
Yeah, I did. That was interesting. Also, it was interesting that Brady. I don't know if you heard this because I was watching the game, so obviously I heard it. That in 2020, Tom Brady was always a member. They weren't so cheap of the Chicago Bears.
I did hear about that, which is very interesting, but I think he made the right decision going to Tampa. But I don't know. There was just something about that little exchange between Baker and Brady that I just found fascinating.
Well, let's talk about good games. There's a lot of good games on the week 5 schedule, Josh. I got to tell you, there's 2 games I left off of my list that I didn't want to leave off, but we can only do 5. So there are a ton of good games. My games are mostly narrative driven based off ranks. So we may disagree on ranking, and I can totally hear from you. And I know there's going to be a game or two that I left off that you're going to be stunned about. But I went not necessarily based off names and storylines. I went based off what these games mean to these teams this week. So, starting with number 5. Early in the year, this would have been top 3 on my list, but I have it at 5 because I think there's better games. Josh Allen going into Houston to take on CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans. And again, the reason why I have this a little bit lower on my list is because to me, it doesn't mean as much for Buffalo or Houston because the AFC East right now is a 2-horse race. If the Jets lose to Minnesota, spoiler alert, that's coming up. If the Jets lose to Minnesota, they're in trouble. They just got beat by Denver. I don't care if it's a monsoon or not. They looked awful. And obviously, we just talked about Miami's situation. Houston, Jacksonville's a mess. Anthony Richardson gets hurt every time he steps out on a football field. And Tennessee's running Mason Rudolph at quarterback. So Houston's pretty much a lock right now to win that division unless something tragic happens. Still going to be a good game. But again, to me, there's not pressure on those 2 teams like there are other teams.
Okay.
Number 4, the 4:25 window game on CBS. Packers, Rams.
I agree with you on this one.
Let me give you an interesting statistic. The Green Bay Packers, when Jordan Love plays the game this year, are 0-2. When Malik Willis plays the game this year, they're 2-0. And the Packers, again, they're going to be scoreboard watching here this Vikings-Jets game that's taking place in London. If the Vikings start 5-0 and Green Bay loses this game, they go to 2-3, you might kiss the division and potential playoff spot goodbye. And the Rams, again, they're going to try to stay afloat without Cooper Kupp, without Puka Nacua. They lose any more games, though, their season's probably just going to go down the drain because they just don't have players. So this is going to be a critical game that could decide who could potentially make and miss the playoffs in the NFC wildcard picture.
So far, it's going to feel more like a Packers home game than a Rams home game.
Boy, you're not lying there. Okay, number 3. You better wake up early for this one because it's a big one. 9:30 a.m. across the pond in London. 4-0 Vikings, led by, can't believe I'm saying it, in my opinion, the MVP of the National Football League right now, Samuel Darnold for the Minnesota Vikings against the New York Jets. People want to talk about Nick Sirianni and Jalen Hurts not getting along. How about Aaron Rodgers and Robert Saleh? That don't look great. How about the Jets scoring 3 field goals against the Broncos, looking completely inept offensively, and Aaron Rodgers looked all bit of his 40-year-old age. So that is a concern. As I mentioned, if Buffalo beats Houston, the Jets lose, they're in trouble. Minnesota now, we got to be careful. We all think they're for real. Brian Flores is the assistant head coach of the year so far in the National Football League for what he's done on defense. But they're still in a tough division. And they cannot get complacent and think that they're good. And, maybe people are starting to pay attention to them now. And these London games are always weird. They're, cross-country trips. They're neutral site games. We saw it Green Bay, Philadelphia, week 1. A lot of weird things can happen. So just keep your eye on that game. Big game for both teams.
Before you continue, let me just throw in this little caveat. Minnesota has a bye week following that game, and then they host Detroit. So is there a chance that even though there's a bye week in between, is there a chance that Minnesota is kind of overlooking the Jets a little bit and looking ahead to that huge game in Minnesota on October 20th against Detroit?
I do think so, yeah. And I think there's a sense of we're 4-0. There's a bye week after this. We may not give our best effort. It is the Sam Darnold revenge game, though, against the Jets.
Yeah,
So we will see. Okay, number two. We're going to Thursday night football
I
down
like
in Atlanta.
I like this pick.
Now, this is a huge game, in my opinion, more so for Atlanta than for Tampa, because Atlanta is a game behind Tampa. And Atlanta, I don't know what the hell that Saints game was. They didn't score an offensive touchdown. They were winning the whole game. The Saints came back. Younghoe Koo makes a field goal. I technically got them at 1.5. I bet. I go to FanDuel, the line's at 2.5, and I lose by half a point. I was ready to blow a gasket because the Atlanta Falcons are the pain of my existence. But yeah, Baker Mayfield, who I told everybody. I remember telling you this, Josh, last week on the show. I said I don't like Philly against Tampa. I said I think we're probably going to get blown out by Tampa. I think Baker's going to have a great game. This week, I think Baker has a decent game. I don't think he's going to have a great game. I think if this game's going to come down to the final possession, we're finally going to have a good Thursday night game. And I think it means more to Atlanta, the fact that they're a game behind Tampa. So, and now, the number one game. This may shock a lot of people because it's in the 1 o'clock window.
Okay.
I got Ravens Bengals. I think this is a huge game for Cincinnati. If they don't win this game and Pittsburgh beats Dallas, which was just narrowly not on my list, because again, I think the weight of expectations right now on Cincinnati, Baltimore means a lot. Because the loser of this game, Baltimore loses, they're 2-3. Cincinnati loses, they're 1-4. And again, if Pittsburgh beats Dallas, they're 4-1. You're already 3 games behind. So, and this game is in Cincinnati. The Ravens' weakness, in my opinion, defensively is their secondary. I think that is the strength of the Bengals, who still have not found a way to get Jamar Chase the ball. Outside of his 65-yard touchdown last week, which was an incredible play against the Panthers, he didn't really do much. Can Cincinnati pick up a big win? It does look like their offense is starting to click. You've seen it the last couple of weeks. But will they be able to contain Lamar Jackson? Because they have struggled doing so in the past. My honorable mentions, like I said, were Dallas, Pittsburgh, Arizona, San Francisco. If Arizona was 2-2, it probably would be number 5, but that's one of the reasons why it's not on my list.
Okay, so your honorable mentions were Pittsburgh, Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Arizona, San Francisco, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So number 5 for me, this might surprise you, but I'm going to the 4 o'clock game on Fox in Denver. The 2-2 Las Vegas Raiders against the 2-2 Denver Broncos. Neither of these teams won like a great game last week. Both games were just kind of okay. Raiders beat the Browns 20-16. Broncos, as you said, beat the Jets in a very sloppy game, like 10-9, whatever. But both teams are 2-2. Maybe one of them could sneak in as a wild card team. Maybe. That I know that's a bit of a stretch, but it's still 2-2. So it could be a big game in the AFC, all things considered. Given Miami's not what we thought they were, the Jets might be falling apart. We don't know the state of Baltimore, Cincinnati, or Cleveland. So there is an opportunity for the Raiders to possibly, if they can figure things out. I know they just gave Devontae Adams permission to seek out a trade, but there is an opportunity for the Raiders to possibly get the ship pointing in the right direction and make a run to the playoffs.
How much do you want to bet that by the November 5th, which is also election day, why the NFL had trade deadline on the election day, I have no idea. But how much you want to bet by then Devontae Adams is catching passes from Aaron Rodgers?
I would not be surprised. So I'm just saying, I think this is a sneaky good game. That's why I have it on my list. Number 4, That's where I have Ravens Bengals. You're number one. Um, I'm. It's just because I'm a little bit lower on Cincinnati than you are. Um, because I still have a lot of questions about their offense. Kind of like what you mentioned about can they get Jamar Chase the ball in the right situations. Um, but I really like what I saw out of Baltimore last week. I wish they had gotten Derrick Henry that one more yard so he could have had 200 yards instead of 199. But nonetheless, it is what it is. Number 3, I agree with you on this one. Packers Rams. Like I said to you, I think this is going to feel like a Packers home game. I understand why the NFL wanted to put get teams back in LA, but at the same time, you knew this was going to happen. But nonetheless, Rams are trying to hang on with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nakua. As you mentioned, and I agree with you, this is bizarre. Green Bay is 2-0 with Malik Willis, 0-2 with Jordan Love. They nearly came back and beat Minnesota last week, and partially because Minnesota just made some boneheaded plays late in that game to allow Green Bay back into it. But I had this game circled before the season. It's lost a little bit of that excitement for me because I was a bit higher on the Rams. But still, I think it's a very important game. Number 3, that's where I have Bills Texans because yes, both teams are 2-1. Yes, it looks like both teams are going to win their divisions pretty easily. But first of all, you have everything with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs from that press conference. Josh Allen had, I think it was following the Jacksonville game, if I'm not mistaken. But the the Stephon Diggs revenge game aside, this game could decide potentially who ends up as the number 2 seed in the AFC because I don't think Kansas City is going to just drop out of the number 1 seed. So I think this game could decide who ends up as the number 2 seed. And we know in the AFC, having home field advantage as far as you can get is a huge factor. That's why the Chiefs have been to the Super Bowl a number of times. So I've got that game at number 3. Number 2, that's where I have Cowboys Steelers. So you had it as an honorable mention. I've got it as number 2 because I want to see how Pittsburgh responds following their first loss of the season. I told you that Pittsburgh-Indianapolis game was going to be a really good game. And the fact that Joe Flacco came in again and beat the Steelers, I'm just like, why did we let him leave Cleveland? Why? Even though I never rooted for him last season because I can't forgive and forget him as a Raven. That's just me personally. But how does Dallas respond? Like, you looked okay against the Giants. Really, you should have lost that game if New York, like you said, if New York had just put the ball into the end zone once, they would have won that game. So I want to see who bounces back. Does Pittsburgh bounce back and get their defense back and Justin Fields continues clicking on offense? Or does Dallas actually go, oh, we can play well offensively and, look good doing it? And number 1, I'm going to the game on Thursday night. Buccaneers Falcons. I really like this game. Baker played fantastic against Philadelphia last week. Can he sustain that going on a short week on the road in Atlanta, where Atlanta should have won that Sunday night game against Kansas City? They really should be 3-1 right now, but nonetheless, that's not how it worked out. And Atlanta won, I believe, without scoring a touchdown last week, if I'm not mistaken. We've seen a few of those games already.
They scored without an offensive touchdown. They scored on special teams and defense in the pick 6.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me on that. But, these two teams could be fighting each other for the NFC South. So, whoever wins the first head-to-head game between them could have a leg up. So that's my top five. My honorable mentions, I agree with you about Cardinals 49ers, and then Jets Vikings would be my other honorable mention.
All right. Well, we haven't talked about the National Basketball Association in about 2 months, but there was a trade that went down kind of out of nowhere, out of the blue. Karl-Anthony Towns, Josh, headed to the Big Apple.
Yeah, and the Knicks are sending Julius Randle and DiVincenzo back to the Timberwolves. Why did the Timberwolves trade Karl-Anthony Towns? That's what I'm confused about. I get it from the Knicks' perspective. I don't get it from the Timberwolves' perspective at all.
So I think that whenever there's a trade happen, and really in the NBA, because the NBA is the one, baseball, you make trades at the trade deadline, but it's mostly prospects for major league help. But everybody in the NBA wants to know who won the trade. And, usually we really don't know till 2, 3 years down the line. I actually think this trade works out for both teams. And the reason I say that is because I don't think even with Karl-Anthony Towns, the Knicks are actually that much better. I think that Karl-Anthony Towns gives them another score, another option, obviously, being able to clear out the lane for Jalen Brunson, allow Mitchell Robinson to do what he does and rebound the ball, give them another spacer on the floor. We know Jalen Brunson's injury history, with the Knicks. And then from the Minnesota side, they're saying, listen, Karl-Anthony Towns makes a lot of money. Rudy Gobert makes a lot of money. Anthony Edwards is going to be making a lot of money here very soon. Anthony Edwards is clearly our best player. Cat is best with the ball in his hand. Anthony Edwards has the ball in his hand most of the time. Getting rid of Cat and actually allowing Rudy Gobert to sort of clog up the lane might be a better fit for them because Julius Randle can be the guy on the block. He can be the guy that can, sort of take turns with Anthony Edwards without getting in his way. He can be the mid-range jumper. He can give you that second scoring threat at a little bit of a lesser salary, similar game, though obviously Cat has better range. But I think the biggest impact of this all is Minnesota gets DiVincenzo. I think is the biggest factor in this trade because Minnesota needed more bench shooting. They got it now, and DiVincenzo can start. He can come off the bench. He's a good 3-and-D guy. He's going to be valuable for them late in the season. So this trade to me, it didn't really impact expectations, win totals, anything like that from either side. I actually think looking at it, both sides get what they wanted.
The reason I say it's more confusing from the Minnesota side is because Cat played excellent defense against Nikola Jokic in that second round series last year. And now you're giving that up. Like, I don't understand. Minnesota made it to the Western Conference Finals last year. Now, I get it. Dallas basically took it to them and probably should have swept that series, but they didn't. And it was like a different type of matchup for Minnesota, but still, they were right there. So,
I think what Minnesota's telling you is, again, and there was rumors going back to this offseason that Cat could be on the move because they didn't want to pay Cat, Gobert, and Edwards. They sort of felt like if the ball was going to be in Edwards' hands anyways, we'd rather have a proven rebounder more than another scorer. And really what we've seen in the NBA now, I don't consider Jaylen Brown a superstar. I don't consider Jason Tatum a superstar. But
that's where you and I disagree on that.
Those two guys won the title last year. In my opinion, they are both stars. I trust Jaylen Brown more with the game on the line than I do Jason Tatum. But to me, Boston didn't have one dominant player. They had 8 guys who you were afraid of. Tatum, Brown, Holiday, White, Porzingis, Horford, who just retired. I mean, name them.
So, and I think that's why the Knicks made this trade. It's because of one player in Boston. not to dismiss
No,
the
I don't think that's the reason. I think both these teams made this trade saying the Knicks are saying we need another piece that's a second better scorer than Jalen Brunson because we don't trust Jalen Brunson's injury history, and on some nights Cat can be a number one. I think Minnesota made the trade saying we don't really need a second star behind Anthony Edwards. We need Anthony Edwards to be great, and we need shooters around him, and we can get DiVincenzo and Randall, which will probably give you more production overall than Cat. And I also think Minnesota, to your point, was built to be Denver. They were not built to be Dallas. Denver has had another weird offseason. They're letting people go. Jamal Murray never seems to be healthy. Looking back at it now, it almost seems like Denver, struck lightning with that championship 2 years ago. I think Minnesota is telling you Oklahoma City, Dallas, maybe a few other teams in there, they feel are bigger threats to them specifically than Denver.
So the reason I said the New York made this trade because of one player is because I'm targeting Kristaps Porzingis here. You saw the type of impact Porzingis made for the Boston Celtics last season. Again, that's not to diminish what Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or Derek White or Drew Holiday did for them, obviously. But you saw the impact Porzingis made once he was healthy and was playing for the Celtics. I think the Knicks are kind of banking on that type of impact for Cat. And from what I've heard, they're now possibly shopping Mitchell Robinson. I don't know if you've heard that, but
I have not. I think that would be a mistake because I like Mitchell Robinson. I think he's a very good player. And Cat, it sometimes not be the greatest rebounder on every night. I think the difference with Porzingis, though, to your point, Porzingis was the fourth best player in Boston, and they did not need him to win the title. Cat is going to have to be the second best player in New York every night for them to even have a chance to beat Boston.
I disagree a little bit. I think Porzingis was the difference maker for Boston winning the title this year because
maybe winning the title, but I mean, he didn't really play in Game 3 or Game 4. Game 1, he was phenomenal.
I'm talking about overall impact, not specifically in the finals.
Well, I don't know. They didn't need him in the playoffs. He didn't play in the second or third round.
And this is where Boston's run to the playoffs gets questioned all the time because of their opponents and not being fully healthy. You know that story's going to follow them.
Well, I think no one's talking about the fact that Al Horford retired. I think that's a huge loss for them.
Oh, I agree.
On the court and leadership. And historically, we'll get into this in the next couple of weeks as the NBA season gets underway. But we know the last 6 times an NBA champion's been crowned, they haven't made it back to the conference finals the next year.
Right. I saw something that had the Cavs with the second best record in the Eastern Conference.
And I saw that too. I literally laughed out loud at that.
I'm just like, the Cavs have not made the type of additions over the offseason to really make me believe they can be the second best team in the East. Not when Philly made the moves they did. Not when New York made the moves they did. Indiana's still going to be a factor. Orlando's made nice additions. So
this is going to come as a shot at the NBA, and I'm sorry for all you basketball fans out there. Josh, you're a bigger NBA fan than me, but this trade to me came across as, oh yeah, the NBA starting again. The NBA exists.
I get what you're saying. I fully get what you're saying because the NFL has taken over. And to a certain extent, I know Caitlin Clark is out from the WNBA playoffs, but don't turn off the WNBA playoffs because you got a finals rematch from last year between the Vegas Aces, the back-to-back WNBA champions, and the New York Liberty. You've got Connecticut going against Minnesota. This is going to be a fun finish for the WNBA playoffs. So don't tune out just because Caitlin Clark has been eliminated.
Speaking of playoffs, it's time for us to give our World Series predictions. Now, at the time of this recording, the Kansas City Royals, I believe, have defeated the Baltimore Orioles to go 1-0 in that series. The Detroit Tigers have officially defeated the Houston Astros to go 1-0 in that wild card series. So that changes a little bit, especially for me, because I would have thought that Houston would have beat Detroit. Now I'm not so sure. So Josh, you want me to start or do you want to start?
You can start. By the way, currently right now, the Brewers are up 4-3 in the top of the fifth with 2 outs. Mets are up to bat, and you are correct. The Royals defeated the Orioles 1-0, and the Tigers defeated the Astros 3-1. And by the way, we were talking about this before we went live. The winner of the Tigers Astros series will come to Cleveland to play the Guardians, and the winner of the Royals Orioles series will go to New York to play the Yankees.
Yeah, I don't understand why baseball does that. To me, it should be the lower seed against the higher seed. If the six wins, they should have to play the one. But whatever. I do want to say one thing before we kick off these predictions. The New York Mets and the Atlanta Braves yesterday, what they did in game 2 yesterday to basically screw the Arizona Diamondbacks out of a chance to make the playoffs, I thought was absolutely despicable. Where essentially the New York Mets decided we already made the playoffs. We're not going to play our best guys. The Atlanta Braves were like, oh, let's scratch Chris Sale. Now, that may be a legitimate injury. Sounds like he may not pitch in the NLDS, so I'll give him that. But there was all this talk about the winner of the first game is going to take the second game, and then you see them celebrating together. I just thought for the integrity of the game and for integrity of division rivalries, could you imagine if the Yankees and Red Sox were in that scenario and Detroit or somebody needed to make the playoffs, and the Yankees and Red Sox, those two supposed hated franchises, did that? It would be absolutely deplorable. And so on the Mets and on the Braves, I say to both of you, shame on you.
Fair enough. By the way, just for clarification, the winner of the Mets Brewers series will take on the Phillies, and the winner of the Braves Padres series will take on the Dodgers.
So if you recall, to start the year, I picked Braves Orioles World Series. I am not going with that this year. So the Detroit Tigers scare me half to death because I do think they are going to beat the Houston Astros and come to Cleveland. But I think overall, the Guardians are a special team. Stephen Vogt in his first year, I think the Guardians can beat the Tigers and make it to the ALCS, where they will play, like you said, Kansas City, Baltimore, or the Yankees. I just think the Yankees have been the best team in the American League all year long. Now, their bullpen isn't as good as what it once was, which I think is where this series will come down to. Cleveland's bullpen and their pitching against the Yankees' power hitting in the ALCS. And I want to pick Cleveland so bad. I know it's a bad matchup for the Guardians. I want to believe. I'm praying for it to happen. But I got to pick with my head here. I think the New York Yankees, for the first time since 2009, will go back to the World Series in the American League. National League wise, to me, is way more open. And there is a team that has been on a run the past since the All-Star break.
I think I know where you're going with this.
This team is on fire. I think it's going to be a New York Yankees, San Diego Padres World Series. And for the first time since 2009, the New York Yankees, the Giants stink, the Jets stink, but the New York Yankees will be the champions of Major League Baseball.
So you got it being a rematch of, what was it, 1996?
I'm not so sure about that. You're more of a history guy than I am.
I know the Yankees and Padres have played each other in the World Series once before, I think. Let me double check. Yeah, It was, yeah, 1998, and the Yankees won it. So you got it being a rematch of the 1998 World Series. I've got it being a rematch of the 2009 World Series, Yankees and the Phillies. And just like in 2009, the New York Yankees will win the World
So
Series.
we both have the Yankees winning the World Series.
That is correct.
Oh, that would suck for the city of Philadelphia. To once again go for the pain of getting to a championship game and losing again. I don't think the city can take it.
I I'll tell you this. I really wanted to go with the Guardians and the Brewers. I don't know why. The Brewers and the Guardians just seem like very interesting teams, and they could that could be a good World Series.
Listen, I'm just gonna say this right now. Call me a homer all you want. I will not be surprised if our Cleveland Guardians are in the World Series. I think they can beat the Yankees. I just don't have the courage of my conviction to say it.
I'll tell you this. If the Orioles are able to beat the Royals in this wild card series, I could see the Orioles beating the Yankees in the ALDS.
Yeah, but didn't the Yankees just kill them? Like 6 out of the last 9 games they played
I think so, yeah.
to wrap the division. I keep thinking like the Tigers' luck has to run out at some point.
Yeah. Like the only reason the Tigers got in is because the Twins absolutely collapsed.
And I don't like to get into politics on here at all. But for all of those that are on the internet, you guys know the meme of our president Joe Biden, Minnesota.
Yes.
Yeah, that is what the Twins did. They Minnesota themselves right out of the playoffs.
They're not the Minnesota Twins. To steal the words of Urinating Tree, they are just the Minnesota Tees.
I mean, they lost like what 9 out of their last 10.
Yes, they are. They don't because they forget how to win. So they are the Minnesota Tees.
As always in baseball, it's about who gets hot. We talked about this a little bit before the show and a little bit last week. I think kind of fortunately on Saturday, but unfortunately during the week, I think the Guardians are going to be buried in that 1 o'clock window or 2 o'clock, the early afternoon game, whatever the earliest start time is.
Yeah, my mom and I were talking about this on the drive home from work. I think regardless of whether it's Detroit or Houston that comes to Cleveland, Progressive Field's going to be packed.
Oh, it's going to be a sellout. There's no doubt about it.
Because my mom was saying that if it's Detroit, it's going to be crowded, but she doesn't think it would be as packed if Houston comes to town. And I was like, Houston has been to, I think it's 7 or 8 straight ALCSs. They've been to 3 or 4 World Series, and people still have a hatred for them. They're going to want to come out to Progressive Field for that series, for that potential series, anyway.
I got to tell you, it's unbelievable. Baseball does this every year. It's like hockey. I think you could, if the cards fall right, you can make a legitimate case for any of the 12 teams.
Yeah. Like I said, I'd love to see the Brewers face the Guardians in the World Series. I don't know why. That just seems like a really exciting matchup to me. Brewers Guardians.
I'll throw you one that one of my buddies really wants to see, and that's come back to Cleveland for a World Series.
Say that again. Your audio cut out there.
I'll throw you one that my buddy really wants to see, and that's Lindor coming back to Cleveland for a World Series. Mets card.
Yeah. The Mets would have to get through the Brewers, the Phillies, and then either the Braves, the Padres, or the Dodgers.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I got to tell you what, Shohei Ohtani, shout out to you for being a 50-50 guy. Can he get the Dodgers over the top? That's the biggest question right now.
Yeah, because a lot of people are saying I don't want to say they're accusing the Dodgers of not having a legit World Series, but they're saying the 2020 World Series is a Mickey Mouse
Well,
type.
that 2020 World Series, even more than the NBA bubble, was an asterisk because it was 60 games, which really, let's be honest, baseball should be about 100 games. I've been saying this forever. They don't need to play in March and April. They need to start playing Memorial Day weekend, more urgency. But 60 games is just too short.
Yeah. Um,
By the way, they didn't even have to travel.
right. They played that whole World Series in Arlington.
Correct.
So,
All
but
right. Well,
let's get
Saturday's going to be a fantastic day. Not only do we have college football, not only do we have the MLB playoffs, but we got WWE Bad Blood taking place in Atlanta, Georgia. And then there's a UFC pay per view on late at night, which is why this card is being moved up to 6 p.m.
yes. Um, I am surprised that Liv Morgan versus Rhea Ripley is just like I know Dom Mysterio is going to be in a shark cage, but I thought for sure this was going to be a Hell in a Cell match. I really did.
I'm going to tell you one of the reasons why it's not. I've been thinking about this, and I know you told me no, 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 you don't want to see it. It's going to drag on too long. I think this is going all the way to WrestleMania.
Can you keep the interest in the feud that long?
I think it can sort of be like a Cody Roman where like Rhea goes off a little bit to the side. They miss each other for a couple months and then Rhea comes back for the Rumble. Boom, she wins it. And now you got Rhea and Liv one more time in a Hell in a Cell.
Maybe. But I'll tell you what, the match I'm most excited about for this card, Finn Balor, Damian Priest.
Whoa, that came out of nowhere.
I I've been waiting for this feud because you could just tell it was coming, and I feel like this is gonna be the start of a series of matches. I'd like to see this feud be stretched out to WrestleMania, and I think this first match, we know what type of wrestler Balor is as a singles guy. Damian Priest has been awesome as a singles competitor, whether it was as the World Heavyweight Champion or now as part of the Terror Twins. So I think this is going to be an absolute barn burner. I think I would give the slight edge to Finn Balor in this first match, but if Priest were to win, it would not surprise me. I don't know who's going to get. I really don't know who's going to win this match.
Yeah, I think both Judgment Day members are going to win this match. There's going to be some interference in both. I think in the women's title match, maybe Dom finds his way out of the shark cage somehow. And I think Finn and Priest love shenanigans from Carlito and JD McDonough and the rest of the Judgment Day crew. Finn will win by distraction. But I think that, there's a real debate on this show of what the main event is going to be, whether it's going to be the tag match between Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes against the Bloodline, or whether it's going to be this bloody, personal feud where basically CM Punk and Drew McIntyre are threatening to beat each other until they're stuffed inside a box. The promos last night, I know you said you didn't get a chance to see Raw last night. The final promos between Drew and Punk were just chef's kiss, top notch. They didn't say a lot, but it was meaningful. They were both inside Hell in a Cell, actually, with a bunch of security guards. And, Pierce made this rule they couldn't touch each other. So they just took final blows at each other. And Punk, I really like the little detail that he's doing right now. He's not shaving. He said he's been living in a hotel for a month. He couldn't face his wife, AJ Lee, of course, with what he's going to do to Drew McIntyre on Saturday night. There's going to be blood. There's going to be weapons. This may be the most grueling WWE match, if you want to call it, an AEW bloodfest, whatever you want to call it. I think these two men are going to literally destroy each other. They may literally destroy the cell itself. I wouldn't even be surprised if this match takes place on top of the Hell in a Cell, as this is the 30-year anniversary, or excuse me, this is the 27-year anniversary of the first ever Hell in a Cell match on the same night. Bad Boy 97 in your house, the debut of Kane when The Undertaker took on Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, it's going to be a very good match. They're going to have a lot to live up to after that insane, unsanctioned, lights out steel cage match between Hangman and Swerve that happened at All Out. So good luck with that. Um, but it's going to be a fantastic Hell in a Cell match. WWE usually hits the mark when it comes to Hell in a Cell. Of course, we all remember Cody versus Seth. What was that, last year or 2 years?
2022.
Okay, I only even remember. Oh yeah, there was a Hell in a Cell match last year. Balor versus Edge. That's right. The other match, Nia versus Bailey. It's just a rematch of SummerSlam. It's just kind of there for me.
There are some interesting elements to that match, depending on if there's going to be a heel turn or a face turn. Does Naomi turn on Bailey? Does Tiffany turn on Nia? Does Tiffy time actually happen and cash in the Money in the Bank briefcase?
So, what other matches? We got the tag match. We got Hell in a Cell, short women's title match.
That's it. We got a 5-match card because Gunther and Sami Zayn are taking place on Monday, which I don't know where this came from WWE, but I absolutely love it that out of the blue, they have gone back to an old staple way back in the day when I first started watching wrestling, which was let's have championship matches and then stipulation matches on Raw and SmackDown. It gives you a reason to tune in every week. And next week, they're going back to Raw for 2 hours, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. That Raw, you have a World Championship match between Gunther and Sami Zayn. You have an Intercontinental Championship match between Yeet, Jey Uso, and Xavier Woods, and an old-fashioned Donnybrook match between Pete Dunne and Sheamus. Absolutely incredible. Cannot wait for that. And that is on the heels of that damn barn burner that was last night, the last monster standing between Braun Strowman and Bronson Reed.
In which Seth Rollins returned.
Which nobody knew about. That was a great surprise and unexpected. The stomp to Bronson Reed, and now we get that feud.
Yes.
So
which I think I saw Braun Strowman might have suffered an injury during that match.
Oh, I hope not. I've always been a fan of Braun. I always thought way back in the day he should have cashed in on Brock Lesnar and won the title. Damn you, Vince, for ruining his momentum because Braun Strowman was one of the most popular WWE wrestlers at the time. But I digress.
Yes. We also have the debut of NXT on the CW tonight.
We do tonight. That's going to be very interesting to tune into that.
Ethan Page defends the NXT Championship against Trick Williams with CM Punk as a special guest referee. Roxanne Perez is facing the debuting Julia, I think it is.
And then you also have Miz TV now with Miz, who turned heel on R-Truth last night.
Right. And Stephanie McCur is hanging over the NXT Women's Championship match. But then on Wednesday, to turn your attention to AEW, we've got the 5-year anniversary show. Danielson Okada Part 3 is going down for the AEW World Championship. We've got some other big matches on this card. We've got Wrestle Dream coming up on October 12th. We've got Title Tuesday next Tuesday, which I'm not going to really tune in for, and then Dynamite's coming to Cleveland on October 30th. So big time stuff happening in wrestling over the next
there is. Usually the fall is a dead period in wrestling. Not this year.
No. And I think it's interesting what you said at the beginning of this segment, that the WWE moved up their premium live event so it doesn't collide with the UFC pay-per-view. I think that is a fascinating aspect.
Well, that's a TKO move. I don't think that's a WWE-led move. I think that's a TKO board move.
No, but yeah, either way, I think that's a very interesting and fascinating little tidbit right there that I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. in the main event of UFC 307, it's Alex Pereira defending the light heavyweight title against Khalil Roundtree. I'm not gonna watch it because sorry Dana White, I'm not paying $80 for a UFC pay per view on top of my ESPN Plus subscription. No, thank you. But I think that's an interesting little tidbit that the WWE Premium Live event got moved up because of the UFC pay per view. I think that's fascinating.
For the record, personally, I don't mind it at all. I love the earlier the PLE, the better for me.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Um, I will. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch Bad Blood. It depends on some family stuff and whatnot. I'm going to try to.
Yeah, I already know I'm missing Crown Jewel the next month. I got a wedding on that date. Um, but I want to go back to what you said about AEW actually really quick because I'm going to make a prediction for you, Josh. Right
Okay.
before we right before we came on this show, the guy who I have a feud with allegedly, the one, the only Tony Khan. He tweeted out that he has an announcement. I have another big announcement, but I actually think this one's going to be a big announcement. And he said
The,
he's going to make it prior to AEW going on the air.
the new
I
TV
believe
deal.
this announcement is going to be the new TV deal.
Yes.
And from what I heard, it's a good deal. It's not a great deal. I am interested to see not even what the numbers are, but what the deal looks in terms of, you know, is Collision still a thing? Is Rampage still a thing? Did they rename the show? What day is it going to be on? Those types of things. Because as we talked about, with Warner losing the NBA, the fact that Warner has been so public about losing the NBA tells me that they believe they're in trouble. So I'm interested to see from an AEW standpoint if that affects them at all.
So I forgot. Also, with the 5-year anniversary show tomorrow, not only do you have Danielson taking on Okada for the AEW World Championship, you also have Will Ospreay taking on Ricochet for the AEW International Championship. I did forget about that. You've got Britt Baker returning home to Pittsburgh to take on Serena Deeb. We'll see if MVP is on the show because he made his surprise debut last week on Grand Slam, which says to me Bobby Lashley and Shelton Benjamin are on their way to AEW, and they're going to be doing something with Swerve Strickland right away. Yes, please. And on the subject of Rampage, if you remember, Tony Khan said we're about to make a shockwave. I think that means Rampage is going away. There have been rumors that Shockwave is going to be a new show on Fox. And
FS1, I've heard.
okay, well, Swerve Strickland basically confirmed that they're going to be on. It's going to be on Fox or Fox Sports 1. I'll be curious if that's a new show where there's wrestling or if it's going to be a recap show. But I think AEW's taking WWE's spot on Fox.
Essentially, yes. I don't think they'd run Friday nights.
No, they should not. Not going against SmackDown. I would not do that.
By the way, this is so off topic, but did you know that in the 1849 key demographic, which again Tony Khan loves to tout, WWE actually beat college football on Fox Friday night?
Um,
Very interesting.
yes. So as you can see, there's a lot going on.
There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and we got Raw going to Netflix in 3 months.
Yes. I'll be curious. When Raw moves to Netflix, will it stay a 2-hour show? And does SmackDown become the new 3-hour show?
So I'm going to tell you this. SmackDown will absolutely become a 3-hour show. I think Raw is going to be, could be 2, could be 2.5, could be 3. I think it's whatever they feel on that night. I don't think they're going to have a designated 2-3-hour show because they're on a streamer. They can do whatever they want.
Me personally, I think they should stick to 2. I think they're going to get better shows with it being a 2-hour show. That's just me.
That first Raw on Netflix, I don't know if I've told you this of what I think the main event is going to be.
No, you haven't.
Cody Roman 3.
Oh, really? You don't think they would save that for Crown Jewel or something like that?
That's when you do Cody Roman 3. It's the biggest match you can do. The Rock returns, screws over Roman. That's how you get Rock and Roman at WrestleMania. Cody faces a heel Randy Orton
Cody faces a heel Randy Orton.
at WrestleMania.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I do like the seeds they're playing with Kevin Owens and him turning heel.
I think the Crown Jewel match is actually going to be Cody versus heel KO.
If that's the case, I could see a heel KO taking the title from him.
No, he's not going to take the title.
I could see it. I really could.
I
But
think there's a 0% chance. I think they're running Cody Roman 3 back. I think that's the biggest show you're going to do. John Cena is going to be there. Pat McAfee is coming back. It's going to be in Los Angeles. I think Cody Roman 3.
so, as you can see, there's a lot going on in the sports world. We got Ohio State, Oregon coming next week in Eugene. Then you got Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee. The NHL season is starting up next Tuesday. Major League Baseball is into the postseason. The NBA is about to come back. We're getting into the heart of the NFL season. There's a lot going on in the sports world.
And we'll be all here to break it down next time on Championship Rings.
Washington should be favored by more than 3.5 against the Browns. They should be favored by a touchdown at least.